Melinda Gates said, "The world deserves to have women at the table. That's why hashtag Time's Up is not about women asking permission. It's a movement of women demanding to sit in our rightful place." We're happy to be here and sitting at this table, and thank WCW for giving a voice to this important topic. We are, including my colleague Lisette here, is off the table a little bit. We are lovers of sport. We are lovers of women's participation in sports. And we're trying to make sense of the landscape that we see in women's sports, and particularly in women's basketball. And we'd like to present some food for thought today, and some puzzling facts, and some cases to consider that revolve around the topic of women's basketball, NCAA women's basketball. So I'm going to first turn it over to Laura next to me, and I might just add that I want to give her a shout out for doing so much of the work and preparation for this project, and we very much appreciate it, and appreciate her leadership on this project and on the basketball court. So as you know, some of you were actually there, perhaps, taking in the championship this year, Baylor over Notre Dame. And I just want to point out that a year or so ago, we, along with Bridget, our colleague and AD director here, athletic director here at Wellesley, we did a presentation on women's basketball. It's March, but is it madness? And I want to say that we predicted Baylor would win, so we were just a year off. But our reasons were correct, and it was about rebounding, and Baylor had a margin of 17 rebounds per game over their opponents this past year, and 7 per game over Notre Dame. So our statistics proved true. They just were a little off in years. So, as some of you know, I'm a Duke Blue Devils fan because I was a Duke Blue Devils athlete. And however, I have to say that Duke is doing some curious things these days, and I'm going to jump to my colleague to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so this is Zion Williamson, and Zion is, I mean, if we're talking about gender, the difference in the way men's and women's basketball are treated, even at the college level. Zion Williamson was a freshman. He is a freshman at Duke, but he is just declared for the NBA draft, which will be on June 1st. And there's speculations that as many as 6 brands may bid for him. Whatever he makes in the NBA, the brand value of him is tremendous, and he's expected to be one of the first 18-year-old billionaires in the country, which just raises for me the question, I think for all of us, which Muppet kind of prodded us on, is what is the purpose of college sports?
So it was kind of my job to go through the data and kind of figure out how we value women's basketball. And so looking at Laura's data from 10 years ago, and then some of the data from just the last 2017-2018 season, that's where we could get the most data from, since we were working on this before the season this year was over. So I saw some hopeful things, actually. Here on the graph, you can see kind of the average game attendance. That's for the top 25 women's programs, and then the counterpart top 25 male teams. So the top 25 women's teams, and then the male teams that go with those top 25, right? So you can see that the men's average attendance went down by about 10%, and then the women's actually increased by about 15%. And then also, when I was putting this together, I'm from Arizona, and so the U of A, the women's team was in the NIT conference, and they won the conference. All of their games were home games, and so every game became increasingly more popular, and so it was very exciting to see that the championship game, they actually sold out the entire stadium, which was really exciting news. I actually that bottom picture there, I just got that as a screenshot from Snapchat from some of my friends back home. So I thought that had to go in there. So really hopeful information about kind of fan-based recognition and attendance growth. But then kind of the question then, since your study 10 years ago was on ticket prices, the question is how does the market value these changes in popularity with kind of how much the tickets cost, right? Is there a correlation, or is the promotion correlated with this growing interest? And so with a little more digging, I decided to do a case study on UConn. And so we all know that women's UConn basketball is supposedly more popular than men's, right? We all follow it a little closer. But if you just look at these numbers, you know, the top part, those two top figures are really great. And then, you know, pretty similar, that's the most expensive single game ticket that you'll find. But then you go down to the top season ticket, and it's a little confusing, right? It raises some questions, and also the head coach salary. I mean, take that as you will. But I think that it raises the questions about what consumers are seeing when they're deciding what games to watch. And so we'll see some examples coming up about what the consumers do see and what kind of messages those are sending. Yeah.
So here's an interesting picture, I think, to look at. And we're looking at some pricing and thinking about what's the message that's embedded in here from a box office. So this is DePaul, Blue Demons, and you have on the left the DePaul women's pricing. So you can see a single game, adult $10, youth $8, and you can actually get a whole bunch of tickets at $6 a ticket. And then you look over to the men's pricing, and if you look above, you'll see that the women's team is ranked 21, and the men's team is 187. And so now let's take a look at the men's side, and you can see not only the price of the tickets, but also the variety of ticket levels. And so you've got the court side all the way to the end zone. Now, I don't know what the end zone looks like or where it is in this particular stadium, but just by the fact that it's called the end zone, I'm thinking it's pretty far away. And even that is $25, so you can take 4 of your friends, or maybe part of that 15 group at $6 a ticket and pay less than you would pay for a ticket in the end zone in the watching a men's game of a team that's what was that rank? 187th compared to pretty much the top 20 team. So I think it's thinking about what sort of message this sends in regards to the variety of types of tickets, the value placed on those tickets, versus the value of the team that's on the court. This is more evidence that this puts a premium on a fan experience. Here's a breakdown of some tickets for another team. And if you see, the movement on the right is about the things that you're eligible for should you buy that next level ticket. So if you buy the 100, it starts at $150, and this is sort of like a giving level connected to maybe a booster club or something of that nature. And the more you give, you see that you progress towards getting more things, all the way down to a courtside club hospitality. There's all sorts of hospitality coming at the end, so lots of food and drink. Invitational to a postseason banquet, the parking pass, etc. But what you can see here is that there's a level of giving that's connected to a fan experience. And these are desirable fan experiences. And so the more that you give, and this is going into a men's program, the more that you give, the more things that you are getting to take advantage of. And the fact that you are gaining these different amenities because of giving. And at the same time, what we hear as part of the message is that men's sports create more revenue. So you can see that the institution is sort of shaping the way some of that revenue is being collected and that revenue is coming in because of the setup here of the fact that as you continue to improve your ticket and where your ticket seat may be, you're also having to give more revenue to the program.
So this raises questions of institutional responsibility. Every single college in the country is subject to Title IX regulations, and there are serious questions that I have, and I think others have, about not only the role of college sports on college campuses, but the role of the signals that happen when you differentiate ticket prices. And I know that, when I've been on panels in less friendly territory, I've been peppered with the presumption that, it's a market, it's a market, it's a market. Well, it clearly is not a market, because when institutions create differential pricing and differential experiences out of their general funds that kind of lead to a cycle of spending and experience that privileges one gender of play over another gender of play, it's not, this is not about a market. There's more going on here, even though they would have you think it's a market. And unfortunately, this, I came across this when my husband asked me to print out his ticket to go to the Ivy Championship. I had a tennis match, and he went down the street to Yale, and he printed out the ticket, and I immediately took a screenshot of it because I was not happy with what I saw at my alma mater. And we do now have a female athletic director, and I will definitely bring this up with Vicki. But this is profoundly typical. And what you see is, it turns out that you can get midcourt tickets for $95. My husband paid $75 for this ticket, and but you see that and this is very, very common. You pay to see the men's game, and you get the women for free. And that it's not just about filling seats. That's a message, and that's a message that we have to stand up and talk about. So the question is, what do the data tell us? Well, I can tell you that 10 years ago, when I looked at 292 Division I teams, I looked at ticket prices for men and women. We looked at rankings. This is with Allison Tracy. We looked at attendance, and what did we find? A whole lot of puzzle and confusion. You would expect, with that many data points, that there would be some logic to the pricing of tickets. But when I called up the UConn athletic office and I asked, I said, can you make sense of this for me? And he said, well, it's the history of tickets, the history of ticket pricing. And I'm thinking to myself, what in the heck does that mean? And when I called Louisville, who at that time, they had just lost in the finals, and their tickets, even though they were selling out their stadiums, and I was looking at every game, they were $5. And I called up and I said, why $5? And the head said, well, I don't think you should pay more than $5 to see women play basketball.
So we've seen some interesting case examples, but here's a look at kind of the aggregate data from 10 years ago with Laura's data, and then a revamp of that data from the last season, from the 2017 season. So kind of going with this idea that there's a cost for this premium experience that can be experienced only with the men's games. We see, keep in mind the difference of scale here. So on the left we have the single game ticket, and then on the right we have the season pass. And so these are all top, the average highest ticket you could get, right? And so then these percentages that are above the bars, they show the change over 10 years. And so women experienced a 37% increase in premium single game tickets, and 42% increase for season passes. But you can see that those gains were outpaced by the men's. Even though their attendance decreased during this time, keep in mind, this is from the same data set. So we see, back to that first question, the increased interest and attendance are not reflected in the ticket prices, and the gap is not really being closed. And these are pretty mediocre teams compared to, this is the top 25 women's teams, and then there's obviously a large range of where those rankings fall for the men's counterparts, but it's somewhere between the first seeded team and like 256 or something ranking. So it's a widespread. So it's really difficult to account for where these differences come from, but I think that we can make some observations and kind of take what we've seen in those case studies and kind of think about why that might be. But I kind of want to challenge institutions to maybe take a look inward rather than always blaming it on the market, right? Because again, when I plotted these points myself, there were, I did the R-squared thing, all these statistical, there wasn't a lot of sense in it. So, yeah.
So how does all this information about ticket and attendance, how does it have an impact outside of the ticket and attendance story? How does it have an impact on the workforce? And thinking about the possible structural and systematic or systemic inequalities that might exist in the workforce around college hoops. We heard Muppet talk about the numbers in her video about the percent of women who were athletic directors, the percent of women who were coaches in NCAA teams. We're going to further take a look at the leaders of the teams and the value that gets placed on that leadership, and what does that look like in conjunction to the ticket and attendance data that we looked at too.
Yeah, so this data is a little bit different. So it's the top 25 men's and top 25 women's teams. So looking at the pay for each of the head coaches. So I highlighted just a few important characters that you might be interested in. We have Muppet McGraw there. We have Coach K, Ariana. So something that's difficult to see in this graph, but I think is pretty commonplace knowledge, is that there aren't any women represented on the men's team's, coaching side. So it would be interesting to see, in the future, as we had mentioned, when a female becomes a leader of one of these men's teams, how is that going to change the data? But we can obviously see that, there's a big gap here, and even the highest paid women's coaches are just barely reaching what the 25th ranked men's team coach makes. Another thing that you can't really see from this, and it's really difficult to parse out in the data, is the bonuses that men's coaches are eligible for in their salary. These deals where if they win, any package of games or some championship tournament or whatnot, there's little incentives in there that the women don't really have accessibility to. Those packages aren't really an option. So yeah, I think it paints a really solid picture about the previous data about the ticket prices, how we value those women on the court, and then how we value the coaching staff as well, who are coaching women.
Great. So one would not be wrong to then expect that, well, maybe men's basketball and women's basketball are so profoundly different that the only thing in common is the word basketball. In fact, though, what's an interesting thing is that the talent of these women players, these female players who play at the highest level in college, and those of us who were around in Boston 2006, apologies, Georgia, for the finals in downtown Boston when Kristi Toliver, as a freshman from Maryland, made an outside three-point shot at the buzzer to send it into overtime.
Right in front of me, I might add.
I was hoarse. It was just, and she is known for just having nerve under pressure. She is a phenomenal player. She's plays for the Washington Mystics, and she is one of a number of women who the NBA is now saying, you know what, she is a darn good coach, and we can use her. So she is on her off season, because the NBA season is different than the WNBA season. She is now one of the coaches for the Washington Wizards. Interestingly, though, most Washington Wizard coaches are paid anywhere from $100,000 to over $1 million, but Kristi Toliver is paid $10,000. And the reason for that is because the last contract that was negotiated for the WNBA players does not let them go above a salary cap of $50,000, and another player had used up some of that cap, so that she is in a sense not free to negotiate her own labor. And this was done at a time at which, you know, people couldn't conceive that women would be talented coaches, and yet we are seeing a lot more interest in having this talent from the college level, the WNBA level, coach in the NBA.
So we're not without our glass ceiling breakers and our women who are stretching forward, stretching up. And so we thought we'd just put a couple up here of folks, of women who are pushing the envelope, and tell you a little bit about some of their stories. Quick facts, quick information. So the first one up in the right corner is Nancy Lieberman. And I actually had the pleasure of being in a basketball tournament with her back in high school. She was at Far Rockaway. And I have to say that she single-handedly annihilated our team and every other team in the tournament. So I have a good recollection of seeing her shooting and making every basket. But she went on to play, one of the initial players, I think, in the WNBA, coach in the NBA. She was an assistant with the Sacramento Kings, and now a broadcaster for the New Orleans Pelicans. And down on the bottom right there is Sue Bird, who, more recent player, WNBA star, played for UConn. Has won 4 Olympic gold medals, 2 NCAA titles, 3 WNBA titles, I think, and is currently also a basketball operations associate with the Denver Nuggets. But if you just think about what it's taken, I mean, all those Olympic gold medals, everything else piled on. In the middle there is Kelly Kraskoff. She's a former executive for the WNBA, and she's now the Indiana Pacers assistant general manager. I'm feeling bad for her, of course, because they're playing the Celtics and losing. And then in the bottom left there, Becky Hammond, who's a retired WNBA player and now an assistant coach for the San Antonio Spurs. And then getting a little out of basketball, but staying with sports, if you were here in New England and rooting for the New England Patriots football team, you had the pleasure during the playoff game against the Chargers of seeing the first female referee reffing on the field a NFL football game. So all of these women have worked incredibly hard and taken huge steps and put themselves out there for multiple years, multiple times, in multiple ways to break that glass ceiling. And I know Muffet referred to how she's tired of hearing the first, and yet we're still at a time where women are doing some of these things for the first time. But we're happy to see that they're moving in these ways, and we hope it's really just a beginning in each of the areas that these women are pressing forward. So we wanted to give an opportunity to digest some of what we presented And I led out by saying we were presenting some puzzling things to us, some cases to think about, some food for thought. And so, does anybody want to say any more before we open up for some questions or reaction? Or we'd love to hear what you take in about this information that we shared, and from whatever perspective you have around women's basketball, women's sports, women moving in leadership in sports in this country. We'd love to hear some feedback, some comments, some reaction to some of the things that we've presented.
I would just add that in thinking about the way this is all structured and organized, that we presume value is connected to dollars, where dollars, in fact, are a way of expressing and privileging certain groups on campus. If you look at, Zion Williamson, or you look at, what you're seeing in terms of the NCAA men's basketball game, I might argue that those are commercial enterprises that happen to be housed on the campuses of educational institutions.